My name is Ken Baldwin. I'm professor of physiology and biophysics at the University of California, Irvine. I'm also the team leader for the Skeletal Muscle and Alterations team within the National Space Biomedical Research Institute. Today I'm going to talk to you about the skeletal muscle system. Skeletal muscle is unique in that it is the largest organ system in the body, and it's probably the most sensitive system within the body that depends upon gravity or mechanical stress for its normal health. And today I'm going to talk about seeking countermeasures to the deleterious effects of space travel on this system. And in order to cover this important area, I'm going to break my talk into several segments. First of all, I'm going to talk about the evolution of the skeletal muscle system and what is needed to meet the needs on Earth. Then we'll transition to the key structural elements of the muscle fiber that is necessary for normal function. And then we'll get into why skeletal muscle fibers deteriorate or atrophy during space travel. And then we'll go over the functional consequences for this atrophying process. Then we're going to think about and discuss the strategies to prevent muscle atrophy, and then look at the current evidence that programs of high loading are successful in counteracting muscle atrophy that occurs in response to long duration space flight, or for that matter, long duration exposure to ground-based analogs such as bed rest. And then I would like to leave you with some important thoughts about how the things that we're learning about space travel and space physiology lead to enabling individuals to live a more productive life on Earth. Now, the musculoskeletal system in both animals and humans have evolved over millions of years. In terms of how animals left the water environment and became land dwellers. And what you see in this slide are three individuals. The one on the left is basically assuming an anti-gravity posture, and that individual, while assuming that posture, is using, through the nervous system, a series of fibers that we refer to as slow fibers, and the slow fibers are innervated by common neurons that innervate each of these fibers, and while the individual is standing in the balanced position, these motor units are being activated to enable this individual to assume that posture. And if you think this is easy to, it looks like something easy to do, why don't you try that posture as you're looking at this slide presentation, and you'll see that this is no easy task. The individual in the middle is riding a bicycle, and I'm sure at some stage we have all ridden the bicycle and it seems pretty easy to do, but if you're going to sustain that bicycle movement over time, it is more intense generally than the posture that the individual is assuming on the other part of the slide. And that individual now recruits fibers that are a little bit different than those slow fibers. And these fibers are essential for sustaining locomotion, whether it's running or, in this case, cycling, for fairly long durations, up to an hour or more. And if we turn our attention to the slide on the right, the individual is getting ready to perform burst or power activities, such as sprinting or exploding away from the ground, as in jumping and so forth. And in those types of movements, a different set of muscle fibers activated by, again, motor neurons are called into play to enable the individual to accomplish that explosive type of movement task. So all the things that are being done here are being carried out under the overall umbrella of gravity. And gravity is the constant force that is being imposed on the body, acting as a force to pull the legs and the body in more or less anchor the body to the ground. And what I want you to think about is, what does gravity mean to you? Do you experience gravity in your daily activities? Are there certain things that are more strenuous than others in how you're carrying about these important tasks that are basically gravity driven? Now, this slide adds a little bit more detail to the things that I covered on the previous slide, and I want you to look at the middle of the slide and focus first of all on the fibers that are designated in yellow. These fibers actually express a certain motor protein that we call myosin heavy chain. Think of myosin heavy chain as the motor that drives the contraction process, and we're going to talk about the contraction process in a few minutes. Now, the unique features of these fibers is that they express only one kind of motor protein, and we refer to that as slow or type 1 myosin. The green and red fibers that you see in the middle are the ones that the individual was using on the last slide while cycling the bicycle. Now, this motor unit, or this grouping of fibers, consists of a faster type of myosin, one that is expressed as green and the other is expressed as red, and one of them is a type of faster fiber than the ones that were labeled in yellow. And if we move to the right, we see again another type of fiber that is really fast, and these fibers express this fast myosin heavy chain, and they allow the muscle to shorten with a much more explosive capability, as illustrated on the right with the individual executing the burst power. Now, these myosin heavy chains have evolved over millions of years, and while I show these fibers to you in the human, just about every animal system has the same type of myosin, and this myosin has been conserved through evolution and through many species. In this slide, we're using a schematic diagram to demonstrate the fact that these myosin heavy chains are different from one another, and they can be easily separated by subjecting the proteins that we can extract out of a muscle fiber, and by running them into an electric field, we can separate. And what you see in this process is that the slow type of myosin that is at the low end of the slide, that represents the slow myosin heavy chain, and then we have the series of fast fibers or fast myosin heavy chain types. And in yellow, there is the fast type 2A, a fast type of 2X, and a fast type 2B. And 2B migrates faster than the 2X and the 2A, and this sort of illustrates the speed of these individual fibers that we call the fast types. So this enables scientists to study their expression, and we can perform a variety of experiments with human subjects, including physical activity as well as inactivity, or we can study these in the space environment as well. Now we get to the fun stuff. What is shown at the top is a schematic that describes an individual muscle fiber. And one of the unique features of the muscle fiber is that it expresses a complex structure that we call the contractile component. And in that contractile structure, there are two primary proteins. And in the middle, we show their linkage together. One is myosin, which is the motor protein, and the other is actin, which serves as a backbone for the myosin heavy chain to interact with. And what you see at the bottom is a blowout of this, in which we have the myosin motor protein with a head region, and some people refer to this as a structure that looks like a hockey stick. And that head region binds to the actin, and it creates a chemical reaction so that force can be generated, and actually there can be movement occurring to slide the actin chain along the myosin, and thus create force as well as movement. And this is illustrated very nicely in this cartoon here, such that during a muscle contraction, as you can see, there is a substance there that is actually calcium, and the calcium is released into the muscle fiber. It allows for the myosin to interact with the actin, an explosion occurs, and thus the myosin drives the actin along the chain, and this creates the movement process. And over on the right side, we can see that dynamic motion whereby the myosin, which is labeled in pink there, is actually sliding those actin molecules along, and you can see the shortening action of that schematic representation. Now, we know that there are the myosin heavy chains that we showed that represent the evolutionary process of these various myosin genes, so that if we have a slow fiber, that whole dynamic action takes place much more slowly. It's not as explosive, but this type of a movement is more economical, and in the fibers that we recruit during postural adjustment allows the individual to sustain this anti-gravity capability in a more economical way. Whereas if we have a fast fiber here, and those fibers are expressing the fast motor proteins, that there is a much more dynamic action occurring, and this favors types of activities where there is a lot of movement, where the muscle fibers have to contract with more speed and with more explosiveness. And it is a result of which type of myosin is being expressed in these fibers that really drives the essence of the diversity in the contraction process that can occur in our muscles. Now, I want you to ponder a question. If you were on the Serengeti plains of Africa and you saw how the lion operates in order to get its prey, what kind of fibers would you predict exist in the leg muscles of the lion? In contrast, if you are familiar with how a sloth lives, and hanging on to trees and for very long durations, what type of fibers would you predict to exist in that kind of an animal? Now, we know that these isoforms of myosin can be expressed in our individual fibers. Now, this whole pattern of expression is not fixed. The various genes and the protein products of these genes can be manipulated. One gene can be turned on and the other gene can be turned off, and now we have the ability to remodel muscle fibers depending upon what is happening or what the physical conditions are that we are imposing onto our skeletal muscle system. For example, during unloading of muscle, if you put an individual in bed or in space flight, we see shifts to the right where we downregulate the slower myosins and we express the faster myosins. And in contrast, if we express more loading on a muscle, having individuals lift heavy weights, walking up mountains and so forth, doing a lot of climbing and so forth, we can transform the expression in the opposite direction. So the muscle is very plastic, and this is going to play an important role when we start looking at how our muscles get redesigned or remodeled depending upon how we are maintaining different physiological states. Now, we get to the fun stuff. What we want to do is to come up with the reality that when individuals enter the space environment, let's say that we're taking a ride on the shuttle, we launch the shuttle, and as the shuttle gets out of Earth orbit, or we lose the Earth's force that would be pulling on the body, the individual that you see on the left is actually in the space capsule, and that individual is in a state of what we call suspension. He's free floating. That individual can sit there for hours and hours and hours and without having the muscles or the hands actually pushing against any object. And in this state of unloading, if an individual were to move and sort of swim in air, if you will, and go to one side of the capsule with one finger, pushing one finger against the capsule side there, that would allow the individual to shoot across to the other side. Individuals can somersault, they can do all kinds of things because the body is essentially unloaded. If we look over to the right side, we see a unique situation that many individuals will really have a hard time relating to. Now, this individual is outside the space capsule. The individual is wearing a spacesuit that is pressurized, much like if you were to wear scuba gear and dive below the surface in water or in the ocean. Now, the unique features about this individual wearing this spacesuit is that that spacesuit weighs about 100 pounds. No, actually 200 pounds, but that doesn't feel very heavy to that individual because the spacesuit is actually weightless, but it is cumbersome. And the astronauts have a fatiguing situation when they do this extra vehicle activity, or EVA. And what you see up at the top of the screen is the umbilical system that attaches that individual to the space shuttle. And this individual is performing some routine checks on the space capsule that we don't see in this particular photo. The other thing I should point out to you that that individual is traveling 17,500 miles an hour in this vacuum of weightlessness. So it looks like they're just sitting there, but in actuality, they are moving at this very rapid speed through this vacuum. Now, we have come to understand through a series of research studies that the skeletal muscle is very sensitive to loading state. And if we want to make the muscles bigger, we need to put high levels of mechanical stress on the muscle. And so we say that the skeletal muscles require almost continuous weight-bearing stimuli to maintain normal protein expression, the normal amount of protein, the normal amount of myosin and actin in the contractile elements. And if you eliminate that ever-lasting stress that we call gravity on the muscles, strange things happen to them. So that in the absence of gravity or intermittent high levels of loading, such as weight training, the muscle enters a state of protein imbalance in which the muscle proteins undergo degradation, and this is increased relative to the rate in which the muscle fibers are synthesizing protein. So keep in mind that in every muscle fiber, the muscle fiber is undergoing continuous buildup of protein and continuous degradation of protein. And if your muscles stay in a normal size, the degradation process is equaling the synthesis process. However, if the muscles are unloaded, this process changes and the degradation process exceeds the synthesis process, and by the schematic on the lower side of the figure, that you can see over time that that nice bulky muscle gets smaller and smaller. And the other thing I should point out is that the slow myosin genes are turned off and the fast myosin genes are turned on. And so what we have here is the muscle becomes remodeled to be smaller, weaker, and less effective to support movement under loading conditions, as seen during normal gravity. But as long as an individual stays in space, it really doesn't do much to the muscle in this smaller configuration, because the muscles don't have to exert much force in order to move around, as I illustrated a few slides ago. So this is what we call a tremendous remodeling process. And that remodeling process is illustrated by some research that I conducted a few years ago, in which we were able to fly rats in space. Now you'd say, well, why would someone want to study a rat in space? Well, it's important to realize that rats, like humans, express the same type of muscle fibers. And rats are under the influence of gravity just as humans are. So that when we flew our rats in space, we were able to track a process of just weighing the muscle. And what you see in the top of this slide here is that we were tracking the absolute soleus weight over time. And what you see is this rapid drop in the weight of the muscle over a period of 16 days. Contrast that magenta line in the upper graph with the blue line, which shows you how the ground-bearing animals on Earth were maintaining their weight. And if we correct the muscle weight to body weight, because when individuals go into space, their body weights get lower or less, individuals lose weight, we can normalize to that loss in relative weight, and show that the muscle is much more sensitive to the gravity condition, lack of gravity condition, as compared to the other organ systems of the body that contribute to one's body weight. So we see that the muscle system is a particular target to this state of unloading. Now, let's turn our attention to another set of data, and this gives us an idea of what actually happens to human muscle in space. Now, this is a somewhat busy slide, so what we have here are data plots for leg muscles under a variety of conditions. And what you see are some ground-based analogs that we call bed rests. And all one needs to do is put these individuals in bed and not let them get out of bed for many days. And we have kept individuals in a bed rest state for as much as 90 days. And while we all like to sleep and take things nice and easy, this is no easy chore for the subjects that participate in this type of an experiment. We can also illustrate some interesting phenomena by immobilizing limbs. And if you've ever broken your leg while skiing or tripping or what have you, and the leg is placed in a cast, the muscle is basically immobilized, and usually the muscle is not allowed to weight bear, and just by not letting the limb come in contact with the ground, we can see that these muscles are affected as well. And then we have another type of situation that's illustrated in the red figures that we call ULLS, or unilateral limb suspension. And this doesn't involve any kind of injury to the muscle. All we do is have the subject wear a large shoe that has a lot of padding to it so that the opposite leg cannot come in contact with the ground, and the individual walks around on crutches, and the limb is put into a sling to just help the individual for supporting the leg without it coming in contact to the ground. Now, this is a very unique experiment in that it also shows that there is a tremendous impact on the muscle by not being able to, again, make contact with the ground or to assume any ground reaction forces. So what you see in the figure is what happens to the percent decrease in the size of the muscle or the weight of the muscle as a result of these various physiological interventions. And what you see is that the longer we interfere with the limb from weight bearing or being able to bear force and so forth, the greater the decrease in muscle size. So all of these models illustrate the fact that whether an individual is in space or in bed rest or incapacitated in some way, the end result is a similar response. Your muscles will wither away. Now, so our muscles get smaller under these conditions. And what are the consequences to this loss in muscle size? Well, what is plotted here is that when we look at the decreasing size of the knee extensor muscles, these are your thigh muscles, as those thigh muscles decrease in size, note that the strength of these muscles, as depicted on the y-axis of this figure, the strength is now decreasing as well. So there is a direct relationship with the smaller the muscle, the less strength it can generate. And that also bears a simple analogy that when you see bigger individuals with bigger muscles, they are generally stronger than individuals that are much smaller with smaller muscles, whether you're dealing with leg muscles or arm muscles. And that's why athletes, for example, or football players, do a heck of a lot of strength training in their legs and in their arms in order to build up strength so that they can be more effective on the football field. Now, one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that when we unload the muscles now, under the conditions that I've just described, the muscle fibers get smaller, and that is shown by the unloading and the arrow where we have a cartoon of a normal size muscle moving to a smaller muscle. And if we look at the type of myosin that is expressed in this particular muscle, it expresses mostly type 1 myosin heavy chain, and over time what happens is that that muscle, as it gets smaller, it also changes its phenotype, and it now expresses 2X and 2B types of fibers that are fast, and this creates a situation where now you have a normal size muscle that atrophies and the phenotype is switched to a faster type. So the question that I ask of you is, what do you think would be the consequence of shifting this muscle to a smaller size and a faster size? Do you think these muscles under these conditions would be very effective in supporting gravity? So here's the punchline to what we've been trying to come to understand. When we have the atrophy process occurring, this creates what I refer to as risk to muscle health in response to the unloading state, whether we're talking about someone in spaceflight or someone in a prolonged state of bed rest. There is a decrease in muscle mass and a shift of the myosin phenotype from slow to fast contractile capabilities. The decrease in strength also involves another factor that happens to the muscle, in that it becomes more fatigable when an individual engages in physical activity. So the muscle is weaker and it has less stamina. And this plays a significant role in the overall health and performance of the muscle. And there is a general saying that as the muscle goes, the bone goes. So that when we start to atrophy muscle, the muscles are no longer putting stress on bone, and now there is a loss in bone health. And so as far as the astronaut is concerned, and as far as an individual that is bedridden is concerned, the individual's fitness falls dramatically, and so you can't really do the routine things that you normally would, and this also creates ancillary health problems. And one of the biggest health problems that we see is type 2 diabetes occurring because of this type of cascade. Now, I haven't mentioned anything about type 2 diabetes, but type 2 diabetes is a disease in which the body does not handle insulin well, and it is an inactivity-related factor. And so one of the easiest ways to treat type 2 diabetes would be to have the individuals become more active. So what are we going to do about this problem of astronauts in prolonged space travel? Well, within the National Space Biomedical Research Institute, and as leader of the skeletal muscle team, we've come up with a strategy. And this strategy has several components to it. One component is the idea that if we could reconfigure or capture gravity or develop a gravity stimulus while the individuals were in space, we probably could solve a lot of our problems, because it's really a gravity problem, and if we could recapitulate gravity, we might be able to maintain normal muscle health, normal bone health, and some of the other variables that are important that I'll talk about in a little bit. We also have a strategy if we could find ways for the individual to lift weights, and that is shown up in the upper left corner, and we call this resistance exercise. And the big challenge for space travelers is to find a device that can load the muscles so that we can subject the individual to an exercise routine, just like many of you are probably doing when you go to the gym and you start working out with some of the fancy gadgets that you can play with while you're in the gym. Obviously, we need to enable the individuals to have endurance, and endurance of the muscle is primarily a factor of having the individual contract the muscles at a very high frequency to induce endurance into the muscle, and this is usually done by having individuals cycle. And the challenge is, can we make design a cycle for in space or a treadmill for in space? And so there are many challenges here to bring about physical activity, and we know that the astronauts really enjoy having some form of physical activity, and this is their primary their primary choice. But there are other strategies that people are trying to come up with. Some of them involve growth factors. Can we give individuals a hormone referred to as insulin-like growth factor that inherently induce a growth-related process in the muscle? And there are some other strategies that involve better nutrition, pharmacological types of strategies to try to block the degradation process, providing phytochemicals that you have in your normal diet, referred to as antioxidants, to decrease oxidative stress on the muscle. So there's a whole host of strategies that people are thinking about doing. And some people think what is really needed is a magic pill. And the question is, could we design a pill that could take the place of gravity And some people think we can, and others think you can't, and that is really a big item of debate. Personally, I think it's better to have these individuals exercise. Now, at the University of California, Dr. Vince Caiazzo has designed a space cycle. And this is a very unique device that I'll show in a little bit more detail, in which an individual, two individuals will sit on the space cycle. One of them will ride just like you would pedal a bike, and this will sort of make like a gondola, or it'll pivot out on its end like a merry-go-round. And another individual can be standing on this platform and do resistance exercises, because you can spin this at a sufficient speed that the individual will actually be spun at 1G, 2Gs, and 3Gs. And so these individuals, when they're riding on the platform and doing these squat exercises, actually get to a point where they have to lift 3 times their body weight. And this is a tremendous stress on the muscle. And this illustrates one of the strategies that is being thought of for counteracting the loss of muscle mass. My project involves both animal and human subjects, in which we can design a training program, a heavy resistance training program, that will put stress on the muscles, and it would be sort of a complementary program to the artificial gravity program. And so we're looking at a variety of modalities here in order to bring about this mechanical stress to the muscle. What we have in the lower right-hand corner is a project being conducted by Dr. Michael Reed at the University of Kentucky. And what you see here is an individual gripping a hand ergometer. And what this allows one to do is to work on the strength of the forearm and fingers, because these are the muscles that are used extensively when an individual performs EVA, extravehicular activity, as I pointed out a number of slides ago. And so what Dr. Reed is doing is that he's trying to provide antioxidants that are normal in the diet, along with resistance exercise, in order to induce a stronger and more fatigue-resistant forearm muscles, so that the astronauts are more effective in performing their duties outside the spacecraft. And then finally, this schematic here tries to illustrate that there are unique protein degradation pathways that get activated when an individual's muscles become unloaded. And these pathways will degrade the muscle into a system pretty much like if you were cutting limbs off a tree. You can extrude it into this grinder, and you spit out and you have bark coming out. Well, that's basically what the muscle's degradation system does. It breaks the proteins down into individual amino acids. And if one could design a pharmacological drug or agent that blocks this pathway or slows it down, this would play a significant role in trying to reduce the atrophy process. So these are 4 of the projects that I'm highlighting from several projects that are part of the research portfolio. And from my perspective to you, can you think of something that one could do that might play a role in reducing this atrophy process? So we'll have you put your thinking caps on here in trying to provide some information to the program here. Now, this is a slide that illustrates the fact that if we have individuals that undergo an unloading stimulus, and so what you see in the bar graph here in white is what happens to the change in muscle size and the change in muscle strength when an individual is subjected to the unilateral limb suspension model. Note that the muscles are indeed getting smaller and they're getting weaker, as shown by the bar graph going down in the negative range relative to normal. If you have an individual, another group of individuals that undergo the limb suspension stimulus, but you give them brief bouts of resistance exercise, you can blunt that response and create a positive effect in terms of muscle size and markedly reduce the loss of strength. And in fact, to a certain degree, the response of these unloaded muscles when they're loaded intermittently are almost as effective as if you gave resistance exercise to an individual that is going through normal weight-bearing activity. So we're very much encouraged by this piece of data and the general findings, because it gives us hope that we can intervene with the right type of devices that we could fly to the moon or to Mars to enable our astronauts to try to keep themselves healthy by these various exercise prescriptions. Now, I want to say a few words about the space cycle, because we think that this is an item or a modality that speaks to the issue of hitting many birds with one shot. And so what you see here in this situation is that by using this artificial gravity stimulus, we can load the muscle, we can load bone, and we can provide a gravitational challenge to the total body, because the total body is impacted. Just about all the organ systems are affected by the lack of gravity. And this is particularly the case where we are putting stress on the cardiovascular system through this hypergravity stimulus. And in fact, one of the biggest problems that astronauts experience when they go into space is that when they return from space travel, they become in what we call a hypotensive state, where they cannot maintain a normal blood pressure, and they are very sensitive to changes in posture. In fact, one of the astronauts that returned recently from space, when given an interview and saying a few words, actually passed out twice while on the podium trying to say what a great experience it was to go into space. But it wasn't a great experience in coming back, because you have to recondition the system. And we know that the vestibular system, the thing that controls our sensory balance and how we interact with the environment and making sure that we're not dizzy and so forth as we move, that is also affected. And we think that this also has an impact on the system. So we see that there are some positive changes that are occurring, but what about conditions on Earth? Does the science that we are making headway in studying problems in space have an impact in some way on Earth? And the answer is definitely yes. Now, on the left-hand slide here, I am showing two individuals. One individual is on the upper slide here is an individual that has had a spinal injury, and so this individual has to be maintained in a wheelchair for locomotion. And this individual, by and large, if you looked at the leg muscles would be small, as you can imagine, and the bone is largely smaller, and it is demineralized. The individual on the bottom side of the slide here is an individual that competes in wheelchair marathons. And while his muscles below the lesion are small, as you can imagine, and the bone has been demineralized, you see in the upper torso by this individual putting a lot of stress on his arms by wheeling. The arms are actually hypertrophied, the bone mass is greater, and if you looked at the bone mass in the spinal column, the bone mass would be greater. So we know that by exerting muscle and putting more muscle stress on bone and keeping our muscles very active, we can impact on bone health. And this is important as individuals get older, and in particular to women that experience osteoporosis, which is very common for many females, and it's also a male problem as well. So by being active and putting more loading on your muscle structure, this is paying dividends. Now, if we look at the two individuals in the center part of the figure, the individual up above, that individual is actually experiencing the #1 disease in the world. Every human being is faced with this, and it is called sarcopenia, or atrophy and wasting of the muscle fibers. The individual on the bottom is an individual who has led a very active life, and that individual has used a heavy resistance weight training program, and while these two individuals are the same age, the body structure speaks for itself. And so, which individual would you like to emulate in this aging process? And then finally, I don't need to remind you is that all of the experiments that we're doing to learn about muscle mass and the things that control it, it is playing a role in designing better resistance training paradigms so that athletes can be much fitter and more competitive in a variety of sports where weight training is an essential component to the training program. So these are just a few examples of what we think the science that we're conducting for the space program has obvious spin-offs that impact a very broad number of people in the general population. And so as I close, I ponder to you, how do you want to age? Do you want to age with a lot of pizzazz, or do you want to become a couch potato? Thank you very much.